Welcome, everybody. My name is Charity Rouse. I am the Director of Local History for the Spartanburg County Public Library System. And it is my delight tonight to welcome our hybrid audience for the first time. We're trying new technologies here and glad that everything's working. And so I have somebody here in the room with me. You may hear somebody come in or out of the room live. And then we've got 14 people so far on the online Zoom room. But we're going to be talking about marriage licenses tonight. And since in many locations, particularly here in the South, marriage licenses are a 20th century and 21st century item, where else can you find marriage records? The lovely couple here on your screen are my great grandparents, Laura Susan Shoemaker and Willis Lawhorn, and that, I am told, is their marriage picture. And you'll see the register that they appear in a little bit. So, types of records which can prove marriages include marriage licenses, marriage bonds, marriage registers, probate wills, estates, and deeds. And those are all court records. Church records, including marriage banns, church registers of various types, and ministers' records. You may find marriage information on a divorce decree, because you had to prove you were married to prove you need to be divorced. You may find marriage and divorce announcements in the newspaper, and family Bible records for those fortunate enough to have inherited a family Bible. So let's look at some examples of these various types of resources. And so we're going to start with the court records. So, marriage license or certificate, depending on the era and location. This is for my grandparents, Warren and Francis. And in 1940, Virginia asked a lot of good questions. It asked their age, race, whether they were single, widowed, or divorced prior to this marriage, number of times previously married. Well, they were both single and had never been married. It asks the occupation of the groom and the maiden name of the bride. If you'll notice on the top line, the bride name is present name of bride. So it gets you, if there's been a change in her surname between maiden name and the current name, you'll see that as well. It asks for their birthplace, and it asks for their father's full name, mother's maiden name, and their current residence. The date of proposed marriage, place of proposed marriage, and then the clerk of the circuit court said, well, I released this on the 29th of July, and they must have picked up that marriage license and gone straight to the minister, because they were also married on the 29th of July, 1940 in Fairfield by Reverend Reynolds, who was a minister of the Methodist Church. So it is very informative. So this is going to depend on when and where the marriage license was given out as to how much information you get. This is my grandfather's brother, Lewis Lawhorn, and he was married in South Carolina in 1957. And yeah, he lived in Virginia. They just went straight south from where they lived in Virginia on the main road and landed in Chester. And so they got married in Chester. Because it's very clear here that they were both from Buena Vista, Virginia, in Rockbridge County. And he was 39 and she was 29. They were not spring chickens eloping. but they were eloping nonetheless. At this time, the South Carolina marriage license asked what their race was. They were white. What their nationality was, American. So I guess United States citizen, American, that works. And the application for the license was filed at 5 o'clock on the first day of February in 1957. And on the third day of February 1957 is when the license was actually approved. So there was a waiting period, but it may have been less of a waiting period than Virginia was requiring at that time. Now, always turn to the back of the certificate because you may find additional information on the back or the second page. So, Hattie Harden of Chester on the third day of February 1957 performed the ceremony. And she was I'm assuming Hattie Harden, was a notary public there in Chester. And so, and then you get their signatures there. So you're always going to want to look, at least on 20th century records, to see who the minister or justice of the peace was, or notary public, who performed the ceremony, because they were the one who was responsible for returning the license to the clerk of court for the marriage to be recorded. Slightly older marriage license. This one's a kind of fun decorative one. But this was in Rockbridge County, Virginia, 1892. And it is Samuel Lawhorn and Sophronia Whiteside, Willis's parents. And it does ask for the place of birth, the date the license was issued, the names of their parents, and then it has the minister's return on the bottom. This was found on from digitized microfilm on FamilySearch.org. And we apologize for the public service announcement over the library intercom. Okay. So you will see that this was from Family Search, and I found it by doing a general search. This one happened to have been indexed, but you can also look through page by page through what was filmed on the microfilm. Some of the time, that's the only way to find what you're looking for. So, this is the marriage register from Virginia, 1916. Clerks of court in Virginia between the 1880s and into the 1900s, overlapping with when the actual certificates and licenses were given to the husband and wife, the couple. The clerks kept marriage registers as well as birth and death registers. I am told that there are some counties and localities in South Carolina that did keep these types of registers. I just haven't seen any. So if you find one and are okay with me using it as an example in a program, send it to me. That's how I get some of my best examples. Because it's a little hard to read in that huge spreadsheet, I clipped the line where Willis Lawhorn and Laura Shoemaker, whose pictures you saw on the first page, were, and I have transcribed it on the bottom here. October 18th, 1916, in Rockbridge County, Virginia, which was the place of marriage. Willis A. Lawhorn and Laura S. Shoemaker, both white. He was 22, she was 20. They were both single, both born in Rockbridge County, Virginia, and both still live in Rockbridge County, Virginia. His parents were Samuel and Phronie Lawhorn. Her parents, Jordan and Etta E. Shoemaker. His occupation is fireman, and the minister was E.L. Wolfe. Now, a note about that occupation: he was a fireman on the railroad, not a fireman putting out fires. It was his responsibility to shovel the coal into the steam engine. So remember, terms may change meaning over time and additional context may be needed. You will notice on that top little segment, top right here, it will record whether someone was divorced, single, widowed, etc. The person on the line above, Willis and Laura, he was divorced, which happened in Virginia a whole lot earlier than it did in South Carolina, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And I do want to mention SAML, period, is how Samuel was written and recorded. So when you're searching for him, sometimes you have to search for SAML instead of Samuel, because it's transcribed exactly as written, and you would not have found him if you searched for Samuel. And also Froney, F-R-O-N-E-Y, that is how she spelled her nickname. She was Sophronia Whiteside, whose marriage license you saw a few minutes ago as well. You will notice in that middle set of items, you do have to go up the column to see what the ditto marks are for, because the clerk was not going to spend their precious handwriting on things where they could do a ditto mark. So things like single, things like Rockbridge County, because they were in Rockbridge County, often had ditto marks. So marriage permissions and marriage bonds. And again, I've seen this a whole lot more in my Virginia family records than I have. I haven't seen any in South Carolina. It does not mean that they did not exist. It just means I haven't found one yet. But this is a little further back in Carroll County, Virginia. And in the top handwritten note, it says, on Esau World, please give Wesley Goad license to marry my daughter Tabitha, James Gardner. And spelling is a 20th century invention and is going away again in the 21st. So sometimes you just have to go, what does it phonetically say, and go with it. Wesley Goad and Robert Goad signed the marriage bond, which is the lower document here. And I don't know whether this was a brother Robert Goad or his father Robert Goad. There are enough Robert Goads that I haven't figured out which one. So, and a marriage bond, and I've seen some confusion about this, they are being held unto the Commonwealth of Virginia in the sum of $150 to be paid to Virginia if the marriage does not take place. It is a bond saying that the marriage will take place, that there is someone alongside the groom who is putting their money and reputation on the line, that the groom is of good intent, hasn't, been courting 4 women in 4 different counties and whatever. If he does court 4 different women in 4 different counties, he can only marry one of them legally. And if that is not the case, then this bond is paid. In 1857, $150 is a pretty big amount of money. But unless something falls through with the marriage, primarily if it's the groom's fault, then that is when that money will change hands, and it goes to the state of Virginia for wasting the time of the clerk, basically. Sometimes you will see that they're bound unto whoever the governor of the time is, that kind of thing. But again, the money does not change hands other than maybe a small filing fee or license application fee. The bond is just there to protect the potential bride and say, hey, no, everything's on the up and up. And those are their signatures, which is just fun to see. So the actual marriage license for this marriage, this is a horrible copy, but it's the best copy we have. I haven't been able to get back up to Carroll County to that court to see if I can get a better copy. But it does ask for, it's the date of marriage, place of marriage in Carroll County, the full names of the people getting married, Wesley Godin, Tabitha Gardner, age of husband, 20 something, and age of wife, that they're both single, the place of the husband's birth and wife's birth, both in Carroll County, and then names of husband, parents, Robert, and I'm blanking on her name, and of course it's in the bad part of the picture, and then James and Emily Gardner. And the occupation of the husband is a farmer. It's not until much later in the 20th century that the woman has a chance to put an occupation down, because for many, women weren't expected to work. That the marriage did happen. So, but what if I can't find a marriage license or bond? Because of course in South Carolina, we did not start requiring marriage licenses until July of 1911. Other states had kind of similar timelines. The further into the Northeast you get, the earlier those records exist and the more consistently those records were kept. The South, because it was lower population and a little bit later settlement as you move south and southwest, sometimes you don't get as much paperwork, a little more frontier distrust of government in the South. So there are options. There are times when, as in the picture on the left, that there are marriages implied in South Carolina equity reports, law reports, miscellaneous provincial and South Carolina early records, marriage settlements, so that could be marriage dower, and then again, more miscellaneous records of South Carolina. And so these are indexes, and they tell you where to go in the original record to find that paperwork. And Langdon did these and many, many, many other record transcriptions and abstracts. On the right-hand side, there's some Brent Holcomb's South Carolina marriages for a couple of different periods from a couple of different types of resources. So some focus on various regions like the upcountry of South Carolina. Some are specific to certain newspapers, certain time periods. So always look for these abstracts and indexes that point you to the records where the person has been found. Now, please note that in probate land, other records, you may find the husband's name rather than the wife's name in court records having to do with her father or grandfather or other family members' will or probate. There are deeds where you will see son, son-in-law, son-in-law, oops, single daughter. And you have to match up those son-in-laws with the other daughters to see which implied daughter that son-in-law is married to. You may get fortunate. Sometimes you actually get my daughter Louisa and her husband John. whatever the surname is. So it just depends on the clerk, it depends on the document, it depends on the family. So, and it depends on the time period, because you start seeing the women's names appearing in the latter half of the 1800s, more so than the early half of the 1800s. And this is because South Carolina, Virginia, and others followed the legal doctrine of coverture. And that says that a married woman's identity is identical to that of her husband. This is also referred to as femme covert. So if you see that term, you know that female is legally seen as just part of her husband and his legal identity. If the woman is married but can act on her own behalf, or if she is single or widowed, she may be referred to as a femme sole. There are legal processes for a woman who is married to name herself a femme sole, if she is running a business, that kind of thing. If there's a legal separation, there's often a newspaper advertisement that is taken out for a certain amount of time that says she is operating on her own behalf, and that the husband, she will not do anything about the husband's debts. So legally, she is separating herself from her husband. At least in financial matters, divorce is a whole nother issue, at least in South Carolina. Many counties or states do have the indexes or abstracts, which list these implied marriages. But also note that the date given is the date of the court record, not of the marriage. Unless it specifically says in that court record, my wife, Susan, married on March 1st, 1800, the court record of the probate is when he died, and it's in 1818. The date that you can cite is as of March, whatever 1818, they were married, or they were married prior to that, if it is the spouse's probate. What do some of these look like? So this is one of Brent Holcomb's books, South Carolina Marriages, 1688 to 1799. Always look in the front of the book. Any abstractor or indexer worth their salt will give their sources and give you a key to the abbreviations they used. And then the bad ones don't. And that always makes us very irritated, because part of genealogy is being able to follow the breadcrumbs and do your own confirmation of the resources that have been given to you. So this is what one of the pages looks like. And this is a close-up. On the left, we have South Carolina marriages for some Allens, none that I am aware of are connected to me, but But at the end of each thing, you see St. Philip's Parish Records, or Fred PR. So I think that would be Prince Frederick Parish Records. But if you go to the front of the book, you will be able to see what Hist Oberg means. And it is records that were published in the History of Orangeburg County, South Carolina by A.S. Sally. And now you know you need to go to that book and see what it is. You will also find lists of this sort in various publications, like the Pinckney District Chapter Journal, the Carolina Herald, which is the State Genealogical Society Journal, and many, many others. Here are some indexes of court records and newspapers that we have in the Kennedy room. It is a very small sampling, but it gives you an idea of what types of things have been abstracted or indexed. One of these is Spartanburg marriages, 1785 to 1911, implied in probate records. So again, you are going to see the name of the man, the name of the woman. Sometimes you see, oh, daughter of Willis Allen or daughter of some Sumner. Then you get the file and the date of the file. So you know that they are alive in that time frame and referred to as man and wife. This is one of those Lipscombs that was on the previous page. This is probate number 2944 in 1859. And in it, Robert Lipscomb lists his two daughters. This is in his will that is part of the probate. Mary Ann Lettuce Linder and Hardinia Victoria Lipscomb. Later in the document, wife Allie and son-in-law Lee Linder are named executors of the estate. Since he explicitly says son-in-law Lee Linder and his daughter Mary Ann is using the surname Linder, then you can assume that in 1859, at the time of Robert's death, that Lee and Mary Ann are married. We don't know how long they've been married. We don't know if Hardinia ever got married after this, but at least in this document, we can say husband and wife, Mary Ann and Lee Linder. We have some indexes that were done by former staff members and volunteers here in the Kennedy room and the various Spartanburg papers. This one happens to be marriages in the Spartanburg Herald and Journal, 1902 to 1911. And you'll see that it's got name of one spouse, the name of the second spouse. SH is Spartanburg Herald, SJ is Spartanburg Journal, SWH is Spartanburg Weekly Herald, and what page number, date and page number for that. These were obviously done early enough in the 20th century that they did not do 4-digit years. Shame on them. We're having to go back and edit a lot of things as we have time and are able to, because we need 4-digit years. I mean, fortunately, the title tells us what our time frame is, but if we wanted to move this into a larger database, we have a lot of work to do. So at random, I picked Florence Allen and John Casey's to look at. Sent my colleague Cheryl on somewhat of a wild goose chase today. We did find in our new news bank historic Spartanburg papers database, which covers 1906 to 1998. So it doesn't cover all the older papers, but just the full run from 1906 to 1998. And it doesn't include 1998 to current. That's in a different part of our newspaper subscriptions. But happens that John Casey and Miss Florence Allen, oh, she was the daughter of Reverend J.J. Allen. She could be a cousin of this place, and that would be Enery. And it was a special correspondent from Enery who was reporting this, and that they were married at the bride's home by Reverend B.B. Hill. And then it goes on, and oh, there was somebody who passed away, and that somebody has opened a business. So this is in the community notes. It's not in a marriage listing page. It's just in general notes. So sometimes you have to dig a little bit. Cheryl went to the microfilm that was cited in the index. And I don't know about you, but I can't read that. Now, I can read it well enough to know that those are the same words that are in the other article. So whoever was doing this particular microfilm wasn't doing a very good job, and it was a pretty bad, messy copy of the paper on the microfilm. So sometimes you start getting, oh no, I can't read it. Well, keep looking, because this is from a different roll of microfilm from the Daily Herald, which was at the same time period as the Weekly Herald. Why it didn't get indexed in both places, I'm not totally sure, and why they picked the blurry one versus the clear one, I don't know. However, we're just fortunate that the same entry column got reprinted in 2 papers here in Spartanburg. There may have been a little newspaper and entry at that time, I don't know. And it may have been in other papers, I didn't look further, but sometimes you have to look for the next option. So, sometimes it is special to other papers. South Carolina is extremely fortunate in that there is a state newspaper published in Columbia and marvelously titled The State. Please note that other states, such as Kansas, the papers in the capital of Kansas don't cover statewide. They barely cover Shawnee County. And there was a morning paper and an afternoon paper there too. We would get people from South Carolina going, well, it's the state newspaper. No, it's the Topeka Capital Journal, or the Topeka Capital, or the Topeka Journal, depending on time frame. And it didn't cover Wichita or Junction City. So do a little research about what papers might be. Talk to the local librarian in the reference staff at the library in the area that you are looking for information in, because you may very well find that, hey, check for something in the state. If they were prominent enough, or if it was interesting enough news, it might have been covered in the state or even in the Charleston News and Courier. So this happened to be specialed to the state from LATA, March 31st in 1901, that Mr. Austin Manning, the popular cashier of the Merchants and Farmers Bank, apparently he was pretty charismatic. He was quietly married to Miss Mabel Allen, daughter of Mr. Joseph Allen, the 30th of this month. So the day before, at 9 o'clock in the morning, and Reverend D. Tiller performed the marriage at the home of the bride. And they didn't even tell their friends who were invited to something at the house that they were getting married until they got there. So, and then it talks a little bit more about the fact that he's also proprietor of the LATA hardware store and an entrepreneur in the area. But that was a nice little find in the state newspaper. So divorce records, you have to prove that you were married in order to divorce, because if you weren't married, why would you need to divorce? And just a reminder that divorce was legal in South Carolina from, I believe, 1872 to 1878. And then starting in 1949. So, once the legislature passed it in 1949. In the 1870s, you were going to find that in the local court records for Court of Common Pleas, I think, is which court it is, but it may depend on the county. And it was a very small window. Prior to that and after that period, until 1949, it was by act of the legislature. And they didn't act on any divorces, maybe a handful over that entire history of South Carolina, until, other than that little window in the 1870s, until 1949. Divorce records are in family court, and those records are a little harder to get your hands on. But this is a newspaper article that reminds us that divorces were legalized in South Carolina early in 1949. 191 divorce suits have been filed at Spartanburg County Courthouse. Records Monday showed that complaints were filed here in heavy volume shortly after the legislature gave courts in the state power to grant divorces. More recently, proceedings have leveled off. Probate Judge William Davenport and his staff issued 1,736 marriage licenses during 1949. This was 235 under 1948's and 1,345 in excess of all divorce suits filed. So they were making a point in this article that the marriages far outweighed the divorces. Life was okay. So check in the newspaper to see if divorce is mentioned. Often marriage licenses and divorce license filing are mentioned in the legal notices part of the paper. You might not get details, but at least you know the names of the parties and when it was filed. Friend of mine, we found the newspaper article that outed her grandparents for their marriage after it was found that their earlier marriage wasn't valid because his divorce hadn't gone through. And there was, 30 odd years and a bunch of kids between those two dates, and they were trying to keep it on the down low. Got put in the newspaper article and everybody found out. So newspapers are sometimes really good resources. Another place to look will be church, minister, and denominational records. This is a photocopy book that we have in the Kennedy room. And at some point, Horace Gilbert did index this, but it is a book of the 588 marriages performed by Reverend Charles Lethco Boiter from 1918 to 1966. And so if you knew that your person you're looking for had been married by the Reverend Charles Lethco Boiter in those years, this would be a wonderful set of proof for you to find out. Now, it doesn't have a lot of information. It just says in 1918, Charlie Sprouse to Izora Brown. Oh, and on August 23rd in 1918, Davis Rhodes to R.B. Goldman Moore. So it's just one of those things where, again, you at least have names, at least a year, if not a date, and then who did the wedding. So there's a little bit of information there. And this literally is a photocopy of his handwritten journal that the minister kept. Not all ministers keep those. Not all of them survive, but it's something to look for. Like, I need to look for that tiller because my great-grandparents were also married by that same tiller. I mean, it was her sister who married Austin Manning. So, makes sense. Denominational newspapers can be a treasure trove, and you find information from those at various places, but often there is an archive for that particular denomination that keeps copies of these papers. We're fortunate here in Spartanburg that over at Wofford College, Philip Stone keeps the Methodist archives for South Carolina, And he has all of these Southern Christian advocates that these indexes index. So I've been able to find family members in these indexes and go over and look those up in his resources. But we also have, and Brent Holcomb, thanks goodness, has done many, many, many of these indexes over the years. But we have death and marriage notices from the Watchman and whatever the rest of that name is under our sticker, the Southern Presbyterian, the Associate Reformed Presbyterian death and marriage notices. So different denominations have their own particular publications. In this region of South Carolina, you may find people who are Baptist actually putting notices in the North Carolina paper, the Biblical Recorder for Baptists. So you may have to look a couple places, but it never hurts to look if they were active in their church, especially if someone in the immediate family was a minister. Often these things got put into those newspapers. This isn't a Southern paper. This is actually Sabbath Recorder is the Seventh-day Baptist newspaper, and it started in the mid 1800s, like 1846 or something, and they have a full run online if you join their historical society up through pretty darn recent. And so you don't necessarily get a full what the flowers were kind of marriage announcement, but you do at least find that Davis Loper marriage at the Shiloh Parsonage, that's Shiloh, New Jersey, February 4th, 1928, by the Reverend Eli F. Loughborough, Daniel W. Davis, and Mary G. Loper were united in marriage. But when that's your family and that you know that they were part of that Seventh-day Baptist congregation, it can be wonderful. So, and that's just one of many examples I have for a friend's family in the Sabbath Recorder. So take a look at those church newspapers, take a look at the church archives, because you may be surprised at what the family was involved in. Family Bible records. Consider yourself fortunate if you have a well-recorded family Bible and access to it. Places to find Bible members. Talk to older family members. Bibles often get passed to either the oldest child or the oldest daughter. And down through that part of the family, on pretty much all of my lines, I'm a youngest from a bunch of younger kids. We don't have any family Bibles. I've never seen any family Bibles. I've heard a few stories. Talked to one of my moms, or well, my mom's now oldest remaining first cousin, and she has the Goad family Bible, and I need to get copies of it. So, but a couple places to look outside of the family. DAR.org has indexed thousands of Bible records through local chapter efforts. Sometimes a copy of this work is held at a local library or historical society, so you may be able to find a copy locally. Earlier years, these are transcripts only, but in more recent years, they are digitizing the family Bible pages, so you can sometimes see the actual image of the family Bible page. Local genealogical societies have also transcribed, and many are now digitizing, the Bible records held by their members. Online, you may find that family trees have images of family Bible records linked. Archives or libraries may have scanned the Bible pages that they have in their collections into their online collections. You may find them in places like Archives Grid, and just sometimes even in a Google search. Now, Rouse Family Bible, there are a lot of Rouse families that are not my Rouse family. So, you know, your mileage may vary on that one, but it never hurts to look. This is a transcription done by the Pinckney District Chapter of the South Carolina Genealogical Society. And it was edited by Dorothy Pfeiffer. And they include name of the Bible, or at least the family that the Bible is associated with. And then it does say the following was transcribed from the original in the possession of Mrs. Thelma, I can't read that, of Solaby, I think, of Landrum, South Carolina. And then they give publication information as it is found in the Bible, that it is the Holy Bible self-pronouncing edition, no publication information. They are guessing circa 1892. And then page 1 certifies that George McSwain Becknell and Elizabeth Minetta Miller were married on December 30th of 1869. And then there's a list of marriages, a list of births, a list of deaths. And so for that family unit of a couple of generations, you have family Bible records. The better of the transcription places will tell you when the publication data is for the Bible, because if you have a Bible that's not published until 1969, and it is recording family members born in 1780, they're copying from somewhere. It is not an original record because the Bible did not exist until 2 centuries after. So it's just one of those things where you do have to look and see what you can find on that. But it doesn't mean it's wrong either. I also know of people who go in and edit the family Bible because the year of marriage was after the year the first child was born, which is actually what happened, but they don't believe it or don't want to believe it, and they edit the numbers. So do watch for corrections. You know. So these are interesting. Some of the places where you can find marriage records. Are there questions or comments? And I'm going to check. There is a handout that is in the chat. So, and I'm trying to scooch through this a little bit to see what the question is. I hope whoever couldn't hear me figured out how to turn their speakers on. There's the handout. I saw a question.
Charity, there is a question there. I just retyped it. Okay,
cool. Okay, does the marriage have to take place in the county that the license was issued in? To quote Judy Russell, the legal genealogist, it depends. It depends on the state and the laws at the time. In many places, the marriage does have to take place in the county where the license was applied for, but in other counties or other states, you can get the license in any of the counties and get married in any of the counties. You just can't cross the state line. So like you can't get a marriage license in Spartanburg County and go up to Lake Lure and get married in North Carolina. You have to have a North Carolina marriage license to be married in North Carolina. In Virginia, I know a couple ministers who have not been bonded in Virginia, and they ended up having to real quick go to the courthouse, get bonded, and then do a replay the next day with the bride and groom to make it legal. So if they didn't know that they needed to be bonded in Virginia. So each state is going to have slightly different laws, and those laws may vary given time frame. Waiting periods very much depend on time period and state. Some states, it's up to like 4 or 5 days, I think, that you have to wait. Some states you used to have to get blood tests. So, it just depends.
Charity, there's a second question about marriage records for people of color.
Okay. Marriage records for people of color. Typically, you're not going to find them pre-emancipation, even with the free people of color. You may, if they are free people of color, they may have those recorded in the county record. But I wouldn't be surprised if they weren't. Starting with emancipation with the Freedmen's Bureau did a lot of registering of marriages that recognized marriages between formerly enslaved during the time of slavery, and they recognized their children as being legitimate. Now, you will often see marriages for people of color in a different section. So you may have white marriages, you may have colored marriages. They may be front of book, back of book in those marriage registers. So it does pay to kind of hunt around, go to the end of the marriage register, even if it's on Family Search. You can just scroll down on the grid view, a whole lot faster if you're scrolling on the grid view, and periodically click and see what records are being done. Sometimes you get lucky and it will be a separate book that has been digitized that's marriages of people of color for whatever county. So it just depends. Into the 1900s, the clerks really were beginning to enter everything, and there was just that field for, are you colored, are you white? Whatever term is used at the time period for that in that area. And so you may find things in different places, but by the 1900s, when most states are doing marriage licenses and stuff, by 1920 at the latest. So between 1900 and 1920 is really when birth, marriage, and death licenses or registers and registration became standard across however many states we had at that point. We weren't up to 50. I never can remember how many were at what time period, but anyway. So again, and that may be locality specific as well, but you should be able to find them in the general record.
Okay, that's it for the questions that came over from the participants.
Okay. I'll give you just a little bit if you've got any other questions that you want to type into the chat. Thanks to everybody for being here with us today. And going on this adventure with hybrid, with people in the room with me here at the library and people online with Cheryl. I hope the technology worked okay. We will send out a link to the recording to people who attended, and this will be posted to the library's YouTube page in our genealogy playlist. It may be the end of the week before that happens, but we will get that up and send you notice that it's up there.
We do have another question. It's how long was a license good for?
Again, that's going to vary by location and time period, but typically it's between 30 and 90 days. If you wait more than 90 days, you will have to reapply. So just because they have a license doesn't mean the marriage actually happened. But it does mean that it was likely to have happened. But if they go beyond whatever the date on the license paperwork, and again, that I've seen 30, I've seen 90, So it just depends. I want to say Kansas may have been 90. Virginia, I think, was 30. Virginia, you have to be bonded in Virginia, and you have to do the marriage in the county the license was issued in. Because I ran into that when the county clerk of court did not believe that I had been bonded in Virginia to perform marriages. And I had my paperwork, I had my little certificate with me. Oh, okay. But she was so used to people from out of state coming in, not knowing they had to be bonded, and just, oh yeah, I'm minister of the gospel, I can do this. And well, in Virginia, you got to jump through the extra hoop, but you only have to do the hoop once. So.
All right, that looks like it.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for coming. We will see you next month for coroner's records.